I'd like to start just very quickly with a question about the broader issue of abortion that Women's Rights Movement has raised recently. You talk about it in terms of human rights or human rights, and the objection to that is the answer to that from people who disagree is that there's no mention of abortion in the Charter of Human Rights. In what ways is it an issue that touches on human rights?
Well, first of all, let's go with the Convention. The European Convention on Human Rights, Article 8 specifically deals with the right to private and family life. This is then compounded with the Convention dealing with the elimination of discrimination against women, which also says that a woman has a right to time and space, bearing of children. So it is, just from that get-go, it is already a fundamental human right. Of course, then, fundamental human rights, you can put one against the other, but what are we talking about here? We're talking about a woman's right, it's not an issue that is related to man, it's an issue that is specifically related to the woman, her right to bear children. So, it is a fundamental human right.
People will argue, of course, that we're also talking the right to bear children and the right not to bear them under certain circumstances. Some people might say that they're not the same thing.
I have a right for that. I have a right to live in dignity. So if something has led to me ending up pregnant in a situation that I cannot have and continue with that pregnancy, I have the right to live with dignity. I have a right to my life too as a woman. If, for example, it's the pregnancy is harming her life, it's going to be detrimental to her life.
In fact, the position paper that you came out with isolates 4 cases in which your movement argues that Maltese women should have access to a safe abortion, or safe access to abortion. And they are, one you just mentioned, threat to the mother's life. One of them is the possibility of a fatal condition affecting the fetus. I understand that would die anyway. There was a reaction to that from the Disabilities Commission, saying that it might pave the way to eugenics and so on. How do you respond to this sort of reaction?
Again, let's go to fundamental rights. Right. I always like looking at things from a rights-based approach. If, and again, this will have to be dependent upon medical and science, a woman is told, a person is told that the baby, the fetus is going to die anyhow. I think even just seeing it from that point of view of that child, the child to live with dignity, basically, and I think it is very cruel, really, for a person, both for that child, die anyhow, and both for the parents or for that mother.
What actually happens in today's situation under those circumstances?
At this point in time, she still have to go ahead with go through with the full-term pregnancy, unless, of course, there is the option, and it happens. We know that it happens that they would travel outside Malta and have it, abroad.
Coming back to the first example you gave of the woman's life being in danger. The argument that we often hear in Malta is that it already happens, in the sense that we are aware that there are cases where the doctor has to make, or the medical people in concern have to take a decision, and generally this decision will always be in favour. And there's even a principle, a toe mind principle, which we don't need to go into, which sort of justifies that. So, given that the argument is that it's already happened, why is there a need for a legal? Why does this need to be put into a legal infrastructure?
Okay, it happens. It doesn't happen. We don't really know. One is to assume that, for example, in cases of cancer, if the mother is pregnant, that she's still provided with the treatment, which would then eventually, yes, of course, in an abortion. Again, I think also it has to be, it all boils down for me, it's down to choice. And you have to give it a structure. It has to, you cannot just assume that it is there, and yet it is not. Because for me, the way I see it, it is a choice. You have to give that person a choice.
One of the strange things about our abortion law is that it doesn't mention abortion at all, and it's a very old law which has not really been updated over the years, and there's evidently very strong resistance to updating it. I mean, to give you an example, it talks about imbibing substances which might kill the unborn child. It's obviously written at a time before contraception as we know it today. I mean, how do you account for this reluctance, this resistance to, at the end of the day, upgrade the law to present-day realities?
Well, I think it's part of it is also part of our insularity and the sense of wanting to have our culture, to stick to our identity, that we are different. And of course, it's also the influence of Catholicism and indoctrination. I mean, for me, that is what it is. So I think that would be part of that. And I think even when one had to look at the negotiations that took place when Malta was negotiating its treaty with the European Union, that was, apart from everything else, that was something that had to be kind of sanctified, if I can say so, protected, which also is quite disappointing, really, to see that even the European Union, the rest of Europe, had no problem with that. So it's okay, and I would say, it's throwing the women under the bus, that's fine, as long as everything else gets going.
It's a very interesting point you raised, because at the same time as all this is going on here, the European Union is funding initiatives to ensure that women in, even for example, Africa and other parts of the world, in parts of the world which are less developed, have access to free, safe, well, maybe not free, but safe abortion. So that's something that the EU is committed to doing. And yet over here, we're an EU member state, and look how hard you have to fight for the same treatment as women in the rest of the world. Do you feel that Maltese women are second-class European citizens?
Yes, very much so. I think that Maltese women are very much being discriminated, perhaps because of our, again, we're not particularly interesting because of our small population, So it's kind of like we're non-existent, and it's all the constant hypocrisy. And that is one of the things that even as an organization, hence why we founded the organization, because women have never had a voice. They were always somehow shushed and hushed in this country, So something had to be done, We are not second-class citizens. We're not there to be discriminated, We are human beings with our own individual rights.
At the same time, sort of like Maltese women's organizations, for example, of which there are a few, came out very, and you're quite the contrary, actually. It seems that your movement has more or less been, is more or less isolated in this view. How do you account for that?
Well, to start off, I mean, kudos. There have been some organizations, for example, the Network of Young Women Leaders and Graffiti have also then, they had come with us. So sort of there are some. But on the other hand, I mean, let's not forget the taboo and stigma that shrouds the topic, And that is another reason why we wanted to do this. To say it's okay, we can talk about it. It's fine to talk about it, but there again, I mean, we, even as organizations, we depend on funding. You never know how that's going to happen. They might be fragmented, but we have received messages of support, private messages of support, which I think is very encouraging for us.
You've also received a lot of negative feedback, let's call it that way. That has extended to death threats, for example. This is two things, spring to mind. One is that part of the reason why women find it so hard to come forward and say, you're being threatened for having an opinion, from as far as I can see. And two, how do you respond to the fact that you are actually being threatened on a human level? How do you actually?
I am not afraid. I'm just not afraid. If I were afraid, I wouldn't do the job that I do. As an organization, again, we confront perpetrators every day. I confront them in a court of law. I have been threatened. My tires have been slashed. I have been stalked. I've received, the messages, the calls at home, telling me who my children are. But I'm not afraid. So nothing is going to stop me to continue fighting for women's rights.
At the same time,